The lights came on just after 9 o'clock in the evening, and for a moment, no one in Kimberley moved. Diamond diggers who had spent years working by candlelight and paraffin lamps stood frozen in the open square, staring upward at a row of glowing globes strung along wooden poles. Some covered their eyes, others simply wept. It was September 1882, and the dusty mining town in the heart of the Cape Colony had just become one of the first places anywhere in the southern hemisphere to be lit by electricity. But this was not a celebration arranged for spectacle or wonder. It was a decision born of suspicion, greed, and fear. Because in the tunnels beneath Kimberley, diamonds were vanishing into the darkness, and the only way to stop the Thay was to defeat the night itself. To understand why electricity arrived here first, in this dry, wind-battered diamond town, rather than in a grand colonial capital, you have to understand what life was like in southern Africa before artificial light became something more than a flickering flame. Homes were lit with candles made from tallow or wax, and wealthier households used oil lamps that produced a dim, unsteady glow choked with soot. Streets, where they existed at all, were pitch black after sunset. Miners working the diamond diggings relied on handheld lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows across the pits, making it almost impossible to supervise thousands of laborers scattered across a chaotic landscape of shafts and claims. That darkness had become a serious problem for the men who owned the diamond claims. Kimberley in the early 1880s was a frontier of extraordinary wealth and extraordinary disorder. Diamonds discovered in the late 1860s had drawn prospectors from across the world, and by the time the mine owners consolidated their claims into larger companies, the value of the stones pulled from the ground each year was staggering, but so was the scale of theft. Workers smuggled uncut diamonds out of the mines constantly, often under cover of night, selling them to illicit buyers who operated in the shadows of the settlement. Mine owners, including a young Cecil Rhodes who was consolidating his hold over the diamond fields during this very period, understood that darkness was the thief's greatest ally. The solution came from a technology still considered experimental almost everywhere else in the world. Electric arc lighting had only recently been demonstrated in cities like Paris and London, and incandescent bulbs were barely a few years old, having been patented by Thomas Edison in 1879. Yet mining companies in Kimberley, eager for any advantage, imported steam-driven dynamos and arc lamps to illuminate the diggings and the town center. The generators were noisy, temperamental machines requiring constant coal to keep their boilers running. And the light they produced was harsh, buzzing, and prone to sudden failure. But it worked. For the first time, the mine could be watched at night, nearly as easily as during the day, and the open ground where illegal diamond deals once flourished under moonlight was suddenly exposed to a merciless electric glare. The reaction from ordinary people was something between astonishment and disbelief. Many residents of Kimberley, both African laborers and European settlers, had never seen a light that did not flicker, drip wax, or require constant tending. Witnesses described the arc lamps as looking like captured lightning, and some workers reportedly refused to walk beneath them at first, unsettled by a brightness that seemed almost unnatural. Yet within a short time, the electric lights became a symbol of the town's ambition, a visible sign that Kimberley, despite its remote location and harsh climate, was keeping pace with the industrial cities of Europe. News of Kimberley's electrified streets spread quickly through southern Africa, carried along the same rail and telegraph lines that were beginning to stitch the region together. And it raised an intriguing question that would shape the following decades. If a remote diamond town could master electricity so early, which city would be next to embrace this strange new power, and for what purpose? The answer came from the growing ports and administrative centers of the Cape Colony. Cape Town, the oldest and most established European settlement in southern Africa, began experimenting with electric lighting for its harbor and municipal buildings during the 1890s as colonial administrators recognized the value of electric power for safer nighttime shipping operations and improved governance of an expanding port city. Electric lighting in Cape Town was not born from the same urgency that had driven Kimberley's mine owners, but rather from a desire among municipal leaders to modernize their city and match the standards being set in London and other centers of the British Empire. Far greater transformations, however, were unfolding to the north, where in 1886 prospectors discovered one of the richest gold deposits ever found, along a ridge known as the Witwatersrand. The town that grew around this discovery, Johannesburg, exploded from a scattering of mining camps into a booming industrial settlement within just a few years. Gold mining on this scale required enormous mechanical power to crush ore, pump water from deep shafts, and operate the winding gear that lowered miners into the earth. Steam power alone could not keep pace with the ambitions of the mining companies, and by the 1890s, electricity was being adopted at an extraordinary rate across the Witwatersrand mines. Large power stations were constructed specifically to serve the gold industry, marking one of the earliest large-scale industrial applications of electricity anywhere in Africa. For the laborers, many of whom had walked hundreds of kilometers from rural homesteads to work in the mines, the sight of vast machine halls filled with humming generators and glowing electric lamps must have felt like entering an entirely different world, one governed by forces they had never before witnessed. While Southern Africa's mining industry was driving one of the continent's earliest electrical revolutions, a different story was unfolding along the Nile. Egypt, under a mixture of nominal Ottoman rule and growing British influence, had been modernizing rapidly since the construction of the Suez Canal in 1869. Cairo's elite and colonial administrators were eager to showcase European-style progress, and by the final years of the 19th century, electric lighting began appearing in government buildings, hotels catering to European travelers, and eventually along some of the city's grander streets. For the residents of Cairo, many of whom lived in neighborhoods still lit only by oil lamps or moonlight, the sight of illuminated hotel facades and government offices created a striking, almost theatrical contrast between the old city and the new technologies arriving from Europe. Meanwhile, along the West African coast, colonial administrations were beginning similar experiments, though usually on a much smaller scale. In Lagos, then developing into an important administrative and commercial center under British colonial rule, small generators were installed around the turn of the century to power government offices and select public buildings. Electric light in Lagos was, at first, a rare and localized phenomenon, confined mostly to the offices of colonial officials rather than the homes of ordinary residents. Still, its presence marked the beginning of a slow but steady expansion of electrical infrastructure through West Africa's colonial capitals. Driven largely by administrative convenience and the desire to project imperial authority through visible modernization. Railways played an important, though often overlooked, role in spreading knowledge and infrastructure related to electricity across the continent. As colonial powers extended rail lines deeper into the interior, whether through southern Africa's mining regions, Egypt's expanding network, or emerging lines in French-controlled North Africa, they brought with them telegraph systems that depended on electrical current, along with engineers experienced in generating and transmitting power. These railway and telegraph networks created corridors of technical knowledge, allowing ideas and equipment related to electricity to move more easily between coastal cities and inland settlements. It's worth pausing to ask why electricity spread the way it did, favoring mining towns, ports, and colonial administrative centers long before it reached ordinary neighborhoods or rural communities. The answer lies largely in economics. Electricity in this era was extraordinarily expensive to generate and distribute, requiring imported machinery, skilled engineers, and constant fuel. Only enterprises capable of generating substantial profit, such as diamond and gold mines, or governments determined to project imperial power, such as colonial administrations, could justify the enormous initial investment. This economic reality explains why, for decades, electric light in Africa remained largely confined to industrial sites, government buildings, and the homes of wealthy elites, while the vast majority of the population continued to rely on traditional lighting methods well into the 20th century. As the early 1900s progressed, engineers began exploring more ambitious sources of power, particularly hydroelectricity. Africa's rivers, including sections of the Nile, the Congo, and the Zambezi, presented enormous potential for generating electricity on a scale far beyond what coal-fired steam plants could achieve. Early surveys and small hydroelectric experiments in these regions, though modest compared to later 20th century projects, planted the technical and economic seeds for the massive hydroelectric developments that would eventually transform industries and cities across the continent in later decades. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shaped our world, and let me know in the comments which region story surprised you most. By the time the early 20th century gave way to its later decades, the foundations laid in places like Kimberley, Johannesburg, Cairo, and Lagos had already begun shaping a much larger pattern, one in which electricity followed the paths of profit, power, and colonial ambition before it ever reached the daily lives of most Africans. The diamond fields that once glowed under harsh arc lamps to catch thieves in the dark, and the gold mines that thundered with electrically powered machinery were not simply footnotes in industrial history. They were the opening chapters of a much longer story, one in which the light first kindled to protect diamonds and extract gold would, over the following century, slowly and unevenly spread outward, carrying with it both the promise and the inequalities of the age that first switched it on. What began as a tool of surveillance in a dusty mining town had, without anyone fully realizing it at the time, ignited a transformation whose true scale no one present that September night in 1882 could possibly have imagined.